For 3 decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson ran non-stop with thousands of guests cycling through. Most nights followed an easygoing, polished rhythm. Carson projected total confidence, certain nothing could rattle him. Yet some evenings spiraled into chaos, animals striking him, celebrities nearly coming to blows, and Johnny completely losing command of both the show and himself. Here are 10 of the wildest moments in Johnny Carson history. Johnny gets punched by a monkey. One night, animal handler Jim Fowler appeared with a young baboon on a leash. From the second it came out, the animal was hyper, yanking and hopping as Fowler struggled to manage it. Carson followed his usual routine with animals, stepping away from the desk and inching closer for laughs. As Johnny leaned in, the baboon suddenly lunged, whipping its arm out and slapping him square in the mouth. "He's all right, he's just playing," Fowler insisted. The strike landed with a sharp crack that cut through the room. Johnny recoiled, grabbing his lip in genuine shock. The crowd gasped, then laughed once it was clear he was still upright. Fowler hauled the baboon back while Carson checked for blood. He quickly turned back to camera, doing an exaggerated baboon impression to mask the swelling already forming on his lip. For the rest of the segment, Carson kept his distance while Fowler watched the animal closely. It was one of those rare moments when real danger slipped onto the set, and Johnny clearly wanted that animal gone. Chevy Chase and Richard Pryor nearly fight. In 1977, Chevy Chase and Richard Pryor appeared together for a special segment. Things began calmly, with Richard talking to Carson, until Chevy started cutting him off. Then he did it again. Richard ignored it at first, but the interruptions kept coming and his irritation became obvious. After one more cutoff, Richard turned and said flatly, "Have you seen Chevy's special? I don't like Chevy." Carson immediately cut to commercial to cool things down. When they returned, the tension hung thick in the air. Chevy interrupted once more, and Richard, dripping with sarcasm, asked if Chevy planned to just take over the show. Each time Chevy spoke over him, Richard's jaw tightened and his body tensed, like he was physically restraining himself. Eventually, Chevy backed off, but the damage was done. Viewers had just watched 2 famous comedians openly dislike each other on live television, with Johnny scrambling to hold the segment together. Rod Hull's emu attacks Johnny. Comic Rod Hull appeared with his infamous emu puppet, already known for its aggression. As soon as they sat down, the emu began jabbing hard at Johnny's face and chest. Carson genuinely lost control, flailing and grabbing at the bird's neck while half sliding out of his chair. Though everyone knew it was a puppet operated by Hull's arm, Johnny's reaction was pure fight or flight. His body didn't care that it wasn't real. The scene dissolved into total chaos, Johnny trying to defend himself, Hull fully committing to the bit, and the audience howling. Beneath the laughter was real panic, turning comedy into something uncomfortably raw. Johnny Carson rarely lost his composure, but that bird pushed him past his limit. His instincts took over, and the show briefly slipped out of his control. Jim Fowler's bat escapes. In 1987, Jim Fowler brought a live bat to the desk, intending to keep it calmly in hand. Instead, it suddenly broke free and began fluttering loose around the studio. Johnny sprang up and ducked behind his desk as the audience screamed and laughed in equal measure. Fowler tried to calmly capture the bat while Johnny yelped and dodged, his fear unmistakable as the animal swooped through the air. A wild creature escaped its handler and began circling his head, and every instinct in his body was telling him to flee immediately. Today, the clip plays as comedy, with Johnny Carson crouched behind his own desk to avoid a bat no bigger than his palm. But at the time, it was uncontrolled mayhem with no plan, no jokes, just waiting for someone to catch it and end the madness. You could watch Johnny slowly rise above the desk to locate the bat, only to drop back down the second it swooped anywhere near him. The band was laughing uncontrollably at their usually unshakable host unraveling, while Ed attempted to assist, but mostly focused on staying safe himself. Fowler kept saying sorry as he dove for the bat again and again, missing as it darted unpredictably through the studio lights. It felt endless in the moment, though it was likely less than half a minute before the bat was finally secured and removed. Johnny emerged, tugging at his jacket and trying to reclaim some dignity with a joke about his reactions, but everyone had already seen him fully panic over a bat. The terror wasn't exaggerated, and that authenticity is why the moment still sticks decades later. Jimmy Stewart reads the poem about Beau. In 1981, Jimmy Stewart appeared on the show for one purpose: to read the poem he had written for his recently deceased golden retriever, Beau. The audience knew something emotional was coming, and Johnny had read the poem in advance, but nothing prepared anyone for how deeply it would land. The poem opened playfully, with humor about Beau being stubborn, unruly, and hard to manage, drawing laughs from anyone who'd ever owned a dog. Stewart's familiar halting delivery made it feel like a routine segment at first, but gradually it shifted into a painfully honest reflection on loss and mourning. He spoke about returning home and expecting to see Beau waiting there, about late nights when he imagined the dog still jumping onto the bed. By the final lines, his voice trembled and broke as both Stewart and Carson struggled to keep their emotions in check. And I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, and he's not there. Oh, how I wish that wasn't so. I'll always love a dog named Beau.
Johnny struggled to keep his composure, barely succeeding as tears welled and his face fought to stay steady. Ed McMahon later recalled it as one of the rare moments he ever witnessed Johnny truly cry on television. The room sank into a deep, funeral-like hush, where every breath felt loud. What viewers saw was a man mourning his dog on national TV, with Johnny Carson openly crying beside him. There were no jokes to soften it and no attempt to move on. They simply stayed there and allowed the grief to exist. Decades later, people still remember the clip because two grown men crying over a dog felt like permission to mourn what matters, even when others might not get it. Carson reads a Vietnam soldier's letter. In 1971, Carson shared a letter sent to the show by an American soldier stationed in Vietnam. The letter described watching The Tonight Show from a war zone and what it meant to young men who felt abandoned, stuck halfway across the world and afraid, using Johnny Carson as a link to normal life back home and proof that ordinary life still existed somewhere. As Johnny began reading, the laughter faded and the mood in the studio visibly shifted as silence took over. He slowed his pace, letting each line sink in, and by the end his voice softened as the emotion caught up with him. Later retrospectives call it one of the show's most powerful moments because it made the war feel personal in a way news footage never could. This wasn't about policy or military plans. It was about a young man, maybe 19 or 20, who just wanted to come home, who was scared and found comfort in watching The Tonight Show for half an hour, feeling briefly connected to the life he left behind. Johnny read the letter with pure respect and sincerity, never centering himself or adding commentary, simply giving the words space to stand on their own. The silence came from everyone realizing these were real people dying far away in a jungle. For a short time, The Tonight Show became a bridge, forcing acknowledgement of a reality no one wanted to face. Then there was baby mountain lion stalking Johnny. In 1983, Joan Embry brought a young mountain lion named Sherpa to the desk during a routine animal segment. Johnny stayed seated as Joan used a remote-controlled toy to activate the cat's hunting instincts. Instantly, the mountain lion fixed its intense predator stare, the kind only wild animals have. The cat crept forward low to the ground, launching sudden, explosive pounces that landed uncomfortably close to Carson's face. Close enough that Johnny clearly measured the space between himself and those claws, silently questioning whether this was actually safe. For several tense moments, Johnny didn't move, locked in place as the animal stared him down, while Joan calmly explained how strong its jaws and claws already were, even at that age.
The crowd laughed, assuming it was part of the act, but Carson leaned farther back, gripping the desk like he might bolt if the cat mistook him for the toy. You could see the math playing out in his eyes, balancing Joan's reassurance that everything was controlled against every instinct, telling him he was sitting inches away from a predator. What made the moment so gripping was the clash between a seasoned host forcing jokes and the raw instinct telling his body to stay alert. Johnny wore a fixed grin, yet his posture stayed tight, and his gaze never left the cat, even briefly. Whenever it lunged, his body reacted with a small but uncontrollable flinch that happens when danger moves faster than thought. Meanwhile, Joan stayed calm and composed, calmly discussing mountain lion habits and conservation efforts as Johnny silently counted the seconds until the segment ended and space returned. On the surface, it was comedy, but beneath that was real unease from a man fully aware he was sitting just feet from a powerful wild animal capable of real harm. Then there was Richard Pryor returning from the fire. In 1980, following a near-fatal freebasing incident, Pryor sat on Carson's couch describing life in a burn ward and believing he wouldn't survive. There were laughs because Richard still commanded humor instinctively, but the suffering behind it was impossible to miss. Carson handled him carefully, softer than usual, letting Richard guide the pace and depth of the discussion. Then came Ed McMahon's drunken appearance. After returning from lunch, clearly intoxicated, Ed sat beside Johnny, visibly impaired, on live television. He stumbled through lines, interrupted cues, laughed at the wrong times, and threw off the show's rhythm with rambling remarks. Johnny's expression shifted from playful tolerance to visible frustration as he struggled to keep control. This wasn't danger, but secondhand embarrassment unfolding in real time. Viewers watched Johnny calculate his response as the situation spiraled. Should he protect his friend or expose the problem? Ed wandered through unrelated thoughts, losing his place and restarting sentences without finishing them.
Johnny repeatedly tried to pull him back on track, only for Ed to drift off again. The band exchanged glances while the audience sat unsure how to react, because nothing about this felt planned. It was the kind of discomfort that makes you want to turn away, but keeps you watching. Johnny pushed through professionally, though the anger was visible beneath his smile. Ed reportedly apologized the next day, but that night became a legendary Tonight Show moment where the damage couldn't be undone. Then came Johnny's final goodbye. On May 22, 1992, the show aired without guests or sketches, just Carson seated alone, addressing the audience one last time. The applause lasted so long he could barely begin. He stood silently, absorbing it as it washed over him. When he finally spoke, he addressed viewers at home. "The best friends I have ever had," he said, before his voice cracked completely. Johnny Carson cried on live television because it was truly ending, because 3 decades were closing, and the life he'd lived since 1962 was slipping away. The audience wept, viewers at home wept, and Ed stood nearby in tears as raw emotion filled the studio. Nothing written could have captured that moment or predicted what would matter. Johnny Carson stood fully exposed, thankful, exhausted, and heartbroken at once. 30 years of flawless control ended with him crying openly before millions. It was the most unbelievable moment, precisely because it was the most human. For once, the persona vanished, and only Johnny remained, drained, emotional, and torn between leaving and not being ready. Every contradiction that comes with endings played out openly as he let the audience feel it alongside him. That honesty is what made it unforgettable. There was no performance left, only truth and the courage to cry without deflection or humor. For decades, Johnny Carson embodied professionalism. He never cracked, he never unraveled. No matter the chaos, no matter how uncomfortable things became, he stayed composed, sharp, and in command. The desk protected him. Humor defended him.
Audiences trusted him because he felt immovable. And then, on the night it mattered most, all of that vanished. There was no desk to hide behind emotionally, no joke to retreat into, no escape hatch from the moment. Only a man realizing an era of his life was ending with nothing beyond the final fade-out. What gave it power was that none of it was planned. This wasn't vulnerability written into a farewell. It was unfiltered, awkward, and real in the way true emotion always is. You could see him resist it out of habit before finally losing control. That internal fight is what made it resonate. Everyone watching recognized that feeling instantly. Sadness, relief, fear, and gratitude collided all at once. Johnny allowed the audience to carry that weight with him. He didn't shield them from it. He placed trust in them. And that trust transformed a television goodbye into something lasting, remembered decades later because it was real in a medium built on illusion. Did this video reveal any Tonight Show moments you hadn't known about before? Were you there to witness any of them live? Share your thoughts in the comments. And for more unbelievable stories from Johnny Carson's legendary 30-year run, hit subscribe for more deep dives like this. Thanks for watching and supporting the channel.